But what are the chances those players are, again, ignoring the, we're using hindsight now. What are the chances those players are ultimately good enough to make a 25-man roster in the next few years? Not very good. At least that's the way it looked then, and it really still looks that way now for most of those players. Now, as you use 2020 hindsight, a 60-game season does change the way you think about this. And I think the one possible change, a thing that I would absolutely have considered, and ultimately if you were put your fingers to my head, I think I would have skipped Yohan Ramirez for a 60-game season and maybe taken a chance on Vimael Machine, who's the shortstop that ultimately ended up with the A's. Phillies took him in the Rule 5 and then swapped him out with the A's. But I think the guy I probably would have ultimately ended up gone for is Christian Santana in the Dodgers organization. He was 23 for the entire year that year, and he had just hit 300 with 10 homers in 100 games in Double-A. Plus raw power, had a legit shot to manage at third base. The hit tool needs work. There are signs it's playable. However, the Rule 5 draft, I don't like it. And I've said this before, so I won't go on and on about it, but the idea is to get players opportunities they might not otherwise have. But when you look back at the 2020 season, like Danny, the whole point of Danny's question, if you know what you know now, if you knew that in 2019 when the Rule 5 draft came up, you might say, let's take Machine or let's take Santana because we only have to get him through a 60-game season. And it's not as much that. It's like, look, the alternative is he goes to the alternate training site. That's the best alternative to having him at the big league level. So I think the Dodgers being so loaded in talent at the big league level and on their 40-man roster, I mean, they didn't even have the opportunity. But if they were a middling club, they probably either would have put Santana on the 40-man or been like, hey, let's call him up to the big leagues and get him some time. He's one of the, like, if he was in the Mariners organization, he would have seen the big leagues last year. That's a guy you get up to some extent and give him some time. That might be a player like Austin Shenton might be later this year or next year. That might be a player that a ton of, not like top prospects, but like maybe that's Zach DeLoach next year. So I think Santana is probably the guy I would lean to there using hindsight. But I think the Mariners did fine. I think even in hindsight, if you take Ramirez, I think I would think about Ramirez a little bit differently. I think I would think about Ramirez as a starter, which is essentially what he did about 40% of the time in the minors anyway. I would continue to think about him as a starter. If I thought there was any chance he could start, I'd say, hey, I can bring him to my organization. Maybe spot start him, use him in long relief, see what we can do there. And it's only a 60-game season. I'm not so much worried about it. And then we throw him back in the minors and he starts games. And to be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure I wouldn't do that after what I saw from Ramirez last year, struggling with control and command. Stuff is good, control and command. And it's really, for me, I mean, this is a project that's not costing you much right now. It's costing you a 40-man roster spot right now, and that is it. So you have a year or two to go, hey, can we help this pitcher become what we think he can become, whether that's a high leverage reliever because he's 95 plus with a nasty slider, or he's also got a curveball. Do we think he can throw a splitter or a change? Do we want to take an extra year and try to make him a starter? I think there's value in that too. So I think one of two things that I would have done using hindsight is either take Santana from the Dodgers and use him a little at third, use him a little at first, use him a little at DH, spot they had more time, with last year than they do now. And, just to give him a better opportunity than he would have had at the alternate training site anyway. Or I would have thought about Yohan Ramirez as a starter. I still think it's a long shot that he ends up a starter, but at least taking him –